Let's see here. Okay. Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Patrick from the Poison Pen Bookstore in Scottsdale, Arizona, and it is an honor to welcome Jeffrey Archer back to our little program here. Jeffrey's going to be talking about his brand new book, Next in Line, which just today we unpacked our signed copies of. Put that up there if you can see it. And I will be happy to put a link in the comments field on Facebook and YouTube, should you like to purchase one. And also, if you have questions for Jeffrey, go ahead and put them in, and Barbara will summon me back on screen towards the end of the hour, and we'll take care of that. So Barbara, over to you.
Thank you very much. Well, Jeffrey, it's only 2 p.m. here, so I'm going to lift my tea to you.
Quite right, Barbara, quite right.
I would rather it were something alcoholic, but what time is it in London? Or where
10 o'clock. 10 o'clock,
okay.
my bedtime.
Oh dear, I hope that's not an omen. So I should say already, it's time to congratulate Jeffrey for being #1. The British have a daily reporting system, and he's already heard that the book has risen to the top of the bestseller list in the course of today. So felicitations.
Thank you very much indeed. It's always, it doesn't matter how many books you've written, or indeed even how many times you've been #1. It's always a thrill every single time, and you always wonder if it'll ever happen again. So when I woke up this morning and saw that it was #1, it was very exciting. Very
well,
exciting.
it's wonderful. It's an excellent time to thank your readers, because after all, it's those people who buy the books or buy the audiobook or whatever version it is that make it #1. So,
Yes,
you know,
yes.
a toast to them as well. I can do that. Right. So, the timing of your book is really extraordinary, given the events that have happened in England and to the royal family in the last weeks. And I imagine that since you've been talking to other venues around the Commonwealth, you've already discussed that. We were saying before it started that both Jeffrey and I thought that Queen Elizabeth would equal her mom and live to be 100. But you think that it was amazing she lived as long as she did, given the pressures that were always on her.
And taking your first point on coincidence, I mean, as you will know, as an old pro, Barbara, I wrote this book 2 years ago. Yeah. I handed it into the publisher a year ago. It's been in the hands of the press for 2 months. Her Majesty dies, and I've got a book out called Next in Line, which was a weird coincidence. But to answer your question, yes, I think looking back on it, I'd assumed she'd live forever, but we in Britain did. And 96 is a wonderful age. And frankly, she had tremendous pressures on her all her life. She served her country honorably and dutifully. And I think if you had any chance in your country of seeing the burial or seeing the service, the funeral service, it was a beautiful occasion, and it brought the British people together. And we now have a king. We now have King Charles III, and we've moved on. And I'm surprised how quickly we have moved on. He's already addressed the Irish people, the Welsh people, and the Scottish people. And he's already moving into phase 2 of receiving red boxes and appointing ministers. So it's been a seamless move, as I suspect Her Majesty planned it to be.
I imagine she did. And do you know the comment that I think has affected me the most of all the people who written up to her when they were watching the funeral and how smoothly it went, and the queue and the transition? Somebody, I think it might have been in the Wall Street Journal, wrote, "Even in death, she's still working for us."
Yes. Yes, that went along with the marvelous statement, "She was never in fashion, she was always in fashion."
Yes, well, she was a remarkable woman. And I think the other thing that makes your book very powerful is that we got a live demonstration of the Royal Protection Service and how it works, the formalities of it, the training and the behavior, because otherwise the the entire state funeral could never have gone so smoothly.
That's a fair point. And certainly in this book, when I decided I was going to do royalty protection and look in particular at the royalty protection officer who was protecting Princess Diana, that was what is in my mind. Her Majesty wasn't in my mind. Right. I'd done drugs, I'd done a murder, I'd done the police. There was certain, in all of the books, there's a different subject. You can read any one of them, but they're all a different subject. And I'd moved on to royalty protection. So that was a strange thing. Here was I writing about royalty protection. And I'm very happy to hear you say, Barbara, that you witnessed how smoothly that went during the funeral, because I've talked to two of the people who were arranging the funeral, and they said, well, frankly, Jeffrey, we were glad when it was all over, the funeral. We wanted to go home hoping there'd been no mistakes, nothing had gone wrong. That's what they worry about all the way through. What will go wrong? Well, I think we can safely say nothing went wrong. It was if a funeral can be a triumph, it was a triumph.
It was indeed. I think the last state funeral was in 1965, wasn't it?
Indeed, you're quite right. You're quite right. And not on television, not seen by the people, done privately for whoever was in the Abbey, whereas Prince Charles decided immediately that his appointment by the Privy Council would be witnessed on television. The funeral in Westminster Abbey would be witnessed on television. The burial in Windsor would be witnessed on television. And it made the British people feel they were all part of it. And that was rather wonderful. And that, I am told, was the decision of King Charles himself.
You know, I can remember all those years and years ago when he was invested as Prince of Wales.
Well, yeah.
And there was some coverage about the fact that it must have been difficult for him, you know, as a kind of modern young man to go through that ceremony with the costuming and the whole thing, but he did it. And it was a really long time ago. I mean, was he?
It's Carnarvon Castle, and that's 40 years ago. And I think he knew from that moment on that, like his mother, he had a life of service ahead of him. Not easy. You could understand someone saying, oh, I don't really want to do this, thank you very much, for the rest of my life. But he's got on with it, and there's he's now started as king, and in exactly the same way. I think his mother would be very proud of him.
Well, I think he learned from that, you know, the importance of ceremony and of spectacle. And the fact that it now translates into mass viewing instead of a few viewing.
Yes, how true.
You know, I think he made a transition. So let's talk a little about the Royal Protection Force. You have some very helpful notes in the back of the book. Now, I've got my advanced reader's copy, and I don't know if the finished book has a conversation with you in it.
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't.
Okay, so I get to crib some comments here, which will be wonderful. So the first thing I find in your comments is that the Royal Protection Service are technically police, but they're a very separate group.
Well, that was the problem. When I decided to research the Royalty Protection Service, I have two people who are named in the back of the book. John Sutherland, who was a detective chief superintendent, and he sadly left the force because he had a mental breakdown, what he described in his own book as one murder too many. And I also had Michelle Roycroft, a lady who had 20 years in the drug squad and 10 years in the murder squad. And they said, I said, I want to do royalty protection. And they said, well, at that particular time, there was a major, the public didn't know, but there was a major investigation going on about the head of royalty protection and whether he was doing his job properly or whether he was doing something else on the side, making himself a very wealthy man. So I said, well, they said, we don't know about this, but we do know the detective chief inspector, a lady who was put in charge of getting to the bottom of it, Well, it was 20 years ago. So she came to see me and she was quite willing to talk 20 years later. The only thing she begged me not to do, she said, when you write the story of this particular man who we were investigating, please don't tell your readers exactly the subject of what he was doing. So in my book, he's running a brilliantly successful taxi service, which is making a packet of money. And that isn't what he did, because I kept my word. I did not, but I had his character, of course. I had what he was up to, how his other officers were involved with their expenses and claiming the most incredible expenses for trips they hadn't even made. And they were up to making $250,000 a year way back 20 years ago. And she caught them and she got rid of all of them. But the subplot of following the life of Diana with her protection officer and the things she experienced as a young princess was a double bonus for me. So because I knew Princess Diana well and I worked with Princess Diana, so all of that side I was able to write without fear of getting that wrong. But on the other side, I needed this chief inspector, a lady, detective chief inspector, to explain to me what the blighters had been up to.
Well, Jeffrey, your long distinguished career and your wonderful connections make it possible for you to write authentically, even if you've never been a royal protection officer yourself. You're able to gain enough knowledge to make us feel as though it's something that you're familiar with.
Yes, a lot of people have said, which is very kind, that I, having been a member of Parliament, now being a member of the House of Lords, one does meet some fascinating and interesting people, and they bring stories to you. You've still got to write them. I mean, writing is not quite as, every one of my books takes 14 drafts. Every one of my books takes 1,000 hours, but you're quite right. It is a privilege to be able to ring up almost anyone and say, well, tell me what happened that morning when you were actually standing on the bridge and it was burning. Tell me, and then you listen to them. And you're quite right. That is a privilege. And I am very aware of how lucky I have been.
Well, you're a storyteller and you get to collect other people's stories and braid them into your stories, which, is a fortunate circumstance. Let me say that going on about protection officers, I think you make a really excellent point when you say the great thing is that protection officers have to disappear. In other words, if they're visible as protection officers, they won't be nearly as useful.
Yes, you've got to dress in a certain way, you've got to behave in a certain way, and you've got to sort of disappear into the background while you're actually there. Most of the protection officers I met and talked to and worked with when I was working with Princess Diana, I wasn't aware of them, to be honest. I knew them by name and two of them became friends, but I can't pretend when we were actually working, oh, there's one over there. Oh, they were always there, and if anything went wrong, which was very, very rare, they moved very quickly indeed. In fact, one of them I didn't know, Princess Anne's protection officer. I actually had a long session with him because he'd saved her life. He was one of the, Princess Anne is one of the rare people in the royal family who's been attacked by someone with a gun. And that happened 40 years ago, and I wanted to see him and I wanted him to talk it through. Now, although that didn't get in the book, I knew the experience he'd been through. I knew what he'd done. A very brave man. He got the George Cross, very brave man, and unquestionably saved Princess Anne's life. So I talked to a lot of officers about what they experienced and what they went through, because I wanted to let the reader know what they went through.
You do point out that one of the things they do is check a building 3 times before a member of the royal family enters. Now, I actually, Jeffrey, have my own story about the royal protection. In 1999, there was a trade kind of a exchange between the UK and Arizona. I don't remember all the details of it, but one day I had a phone call saying that Princess Alexandra and her husband, whose name is Sarangas, do I have that right?
Yes.
Right. Anyway, they were going to be in Scottsdale and they wanted to come and visit the Poison Pen, which was a
How
surprise.
nice.
Yep,
Very
it was
nice.
a real surprise right there.
Well, no, you shouldn't be. The Poison Pen has a big reputation.
Well, it was less so then, but here's what happened. It was really fascinating. The first thing I had to do is provide biographies and, clean records of all my employees. We had to submit all that. And then the Royal Protection people came, and it was a very small bookstore. It's not as big as the one we have now, so it wasn't a huge deal, but they came and they walked through the store and they walked up and down the street a couple of times to check it out. And then finally, Princess Alexandra and Sir Angus made their visit. I gave them a video.
Angus Ogilvy.
Thank you. Right. That we had a video that P.D. James had made for us on the condition that we would never show it to anybody while she was still alive, because she didn't really like doing it. But I thought I could make an exception and create one and give it to Princess Alexandra. So anyway, the whole thing was going really smoothly. We were talking, the guards were there and all, but what they didn't allow for was this really annoying society newspaper we have in Scottsdale. And these 3 society women's burst through the door because they all wanted to have their photograph taken with Princess Alexandra. And the Royal Protection people didn't quite know what to do. I didn't quite know what to do. Fortunately, it was perfectly safe. These were just people wanting to be celebrities, not people who were terrorists or something.
No.
But I thought it was so interesting that despite all of this preparation by the team guarding.
Yes, you can't do something about the unexpected.
Exactly.
But where the police are brilliant in this is they work out whether it is, to quote you, Barbara, whether it's someone who's going to cause a problem or whether it's just someone desperate to get the picture. And they quickly work out which it is.
Well, they did. But anyway, it was completely fascinating. And then I had an opportunity to eat at a banquet with Princess Anne and her ladies in waiting. And that etiquette, I have to say, was completely fascinating. The fact that everybody rose with the princess when she was ready to leave. It didn't matter if you were in the middle of your dinner or what was going on. When she stood up, that was the end. When she came in, she never had to look behind her for a chair. It was all beautifully orchestrated. The doors were open, the chairs were provided. And it was, even though many of us didn't have any particular experience with this or training, we all behaved as one. It was really an amazing experience. And my dinner mate was that marvelous woman. I wish I could remember. She was very big with Carnaby Street fashion. And I think for little pleats, almost like Fortuny. Do you remember who I'm talking about? I'm having a senior moment. A British designer who was very, very well known, and particularly.
Hartnell?
No, she was more of a.
Oh, it was a lady.
Yeah, it was a lady.
No, I don't know.
Well, I'll think of it. But anyway, so that was fun. It was a really interesting experience to go through, but that's as close as I've myself come to royalty, but there you are. So over the course, what you've mentioned what you think it takes to make a great protection officer, including training and personal courage.
It's a great problem, that too, because I didn't write about this, but I became aware that some of them became close personal friends. How could you not? If you're in a car every single day, you're walking around with them every single day, you're there first thing in the morning, they're last thing at night, and they have to get on. Some don't last very long because there's no chemistry between them, and some get on very well indeed. And that itself is another problem, but I didn't touch on that in the book, only to try to show that Inspector Ross Hogan and Princess Diana respected each other and listened to each other. until, of course, the big incident at the end of the book, where she didn't listen to Ross. And I'm not going to tell you anymore. No.
Well, we've talked about the Royal Protection Service and the timing, which I think are really amazing for a lot of reasons. But this is also a very interesting thriller. And to have a great thriller, you need to have a powerful antagonist. I mean, writing the villains, the bad guys, probably is more fun for you as the author.
Much more fun. Yes, much more fun.
And you have more than one.
And indeed, my publicist, a wonderful lady called Ruth Cairns, I said to her, look, we've known each other so long now. I'm going to put you in the book. Do you want to be a nanny or do you want to be a terrorist? She said, I want to be a terrorist. So she's in the book as a terrorist. So yes, terrorist villains are always more interesting to write about, and often in their own strange way, more popular than the hero. But William Warwick has, as you know, millions of followers now, but they love Faulkner. They love the wicked Faulkner just as much. Miles Faulkner is everything many people want to be.
He is completely fascinating. His wife, or ex-wife, I should say, Christina, has a major role in this.
She's a wicked woman.
She is, yeah. And, you know, and well, there's yet a third antagonist in here, which is a splinter, a group that is eventually threatens Diana. I don't think that we're spoiling the book to say that she's kidnapped. And that presents an enormous challenge to William Warwick and all of the other people who are charged with her safety. So you've got the whole Miles plot going on with Christina, but then you've got the Belmarsh prison contingent to worry about as well.
Yes, which is why I put at the beginning of the book, is this a true story? Because when you read Next in Line, you have to decide how much is true, particularly with the Diana sections, and how much is not true.
Yes, and Belmarsh, are you familiar with how Belmarsh works? Because you had some scenes with the Miles being inside that. No, not Miles. Sorry, the other one, which I thought, I love the governor of the prison. I thought that he was a wonderful man and willing to stand up, in fact, and put himself on the line if he needed to. I can't say why, because it would be a spoiler towards the end, but I really admired that.
It's fascinating you say that, Barbara, because my publishers decided to do a survey on me, and they asked 1,000 people, and up comes what I didn't understand this, you will. Up comes what are called a cloud. And then they put in the cloud what they most like. And they said, what do you think they're going to say, Jeffrey? I said, at the top will come storytelling. That will come top. No, they said, character. They like your characters. They like the people in your books. Storytelling is second. I was very touched by that. And you almost gave it away there when you said how much you like Miles, the wicked Faulkner, or you like Christine, who's divorced from him but still trying to get money out of him, and I always enjoy the intricacies of those things.
You're very, very good at revealing character with just a sentence or two, like the governor. I mean, you know, you don't spend paragraphs describing him. He only has to say one or two things, and we fully understand who he is.
Interesting comment, that, because some writers, as you know, will spend a page and a half describing a particular person, their nose, their lips, their ears, the way they walk, whatever it might be. I've always thought, and how perceptive of you, I've always thought if you say the sentence correctly, the reader will say, I know that guy, I know that woman. And it's the way they deliver a sentence, or even what they say. You think, got him, got him. And that I've always thought a greater challenge, to give the reader 2 or 3 sentences and for them to say, I know that person.
Well, I think, you know, it's their inner integrity or values or whatever it is can come out in just a sentence or two. And I thought with the governor, that was particularly true. I didn't need to know what he looked like or how long he'd been at Belmarsh or anything. I just needed to know that he would have been a stand-up guy if he'd had to be.
Yes. Yes. Thank you very much.
Well, talk to us about Margaret Thatcher, because we've talked about Princess Diana, but there's a prime minister involved.
I'm a very privileged man. I had a very strong mother. My father died when I was young. I was only 11. My mother brought me up, and she was a strong woman. I then married a remarkably strong woman, the first woman. She's currently chairman of the Science Museum in Great Britain. Queen has made her a dame, and she's the first woman ever to chair a national gallery or museum in this country. And then, of course, I had 11 years with Margaret Thatcher. So strong women always appeal to me, and that's why they get into the books. I mean, Emma is strong, Beth is strong. My women are strong because I live with a remarkably strong woman, and I like to write about strong women. In fact, they're as important in the book. My women, I have to make them as important as any man. Even the villain, even the wicked women.
Well, the wicked women are terrific, but we haven't really mentioned William Warwick's wife, Beth, who is a very strong woman and in fact has one or two qualities of your own wife, Mary, in terms of what she does.
Very much. Beth is based on Mary, because Mary, as I said, is chairman of the Science Museum. Beth goes on to be chairman of the Fitzmolian, which of course is a combination of the great Fitzwilliam Museum in Cambridge and the Ashmolean in Oxford. So that's just a bit of teasing the reader. So she goes on to become chairman of the Fitzmolian. And yes, very much based on Mary, who all through her life has gone through these things. And now, I suppose one's bound to say, at the end of her career, because she's 77, I'm 82, that she is coming into her last year as chairman of the Science Museum.
Well, you and I are the same age, and I'm ready to tell you that I am not hanging it up anytime soon. Right, we're going to keep on.
Right.
But because of Beth and because of her interest in museum and art and so forth, there is an art component, which I find fascinating in the book. You know, Daniel Silva has done so well, as you know, with Gabriel Allon, his spy, and the idea of an art restorer, you know, being a spy. But I was very pleased to see the things that you write about in this book. Beth actually, is it a spoiler to say she recovers a painting?
Yes, it would be. My love of art comes out, but I always say to writers, if you want to write about what you know about. I have a passion about art. I've had a passion about art all my life. So I take advantage of it. I make Beth chairman of a great art museum. I make my major criminal stealing Rembrandts and Rubens, doing all sorts of things, not because he's stealing them to buy them or sell them. He just loves them so much. He wants to own them. So he's a different side of Crook. We're dealing with a highly intelligent, sophisticated man who loves having on the wall a Rubens in his study. Wouldn't we all? So yes, I say to young writers, write about what you know about, and the reader will know you know about it.
You sure it's just know about it, or is it what you're passionate about yourself? Is there a difference?
That's very interesting, because in my case, it's a passion.
That's what I thought.
I'm a nutcase. I mean, if you look around this room, you can see there are pictures and strange objects everywhere. This is actually Mary's study, but all the things I put in her, because I'm a mad collector. Yes, I'm passionate, as I am about my auctioneering, my charity auctioneering, which is a great hobby for me as a charity auctioneer. So auctioneering gets in to the book as well, because I've been to Sotheby's and Christie's so often and watched the great auctioneers both in New York and in London. So that gets in as well, because I mean, only last week I did an auction for Asian achievers, and the week before I did an auction for Cambridge University's hospital. So I do them all the time. So why not put them into the book? So when Princess Diana has an auction, it's me doing it, really. It's me doing the auction with her, because that's what I did for her.
You did. In fact, I think you say that you did maybe 35 separate auctions with Princess Diana over the course of, your time together.
Yes. The fun of that was, of course, being able to reveal how she could single-handed get more money out of the audience. I mean, she was quite wicked. She would sign tablecloths. She would do almost anything to get more money for the charity. She would raise vast sums of money for charity, and was always willing to do something to please some millionaire and get extra money. I loved working with her.
She was amazingly charismatic and astonishingly photogenic. I was greatly surprised some years ago when I was in Lima, Peru, to be wandering around the city with my daughter, and suddenly we came upon an exhibition of photographs of Princess Diana in the middle of Lima, Peru, and they were marvelous photographs. She was almost alive in them.
The word you used is quite correct. She was photogenic. The camera loved her. Television loved her. And that was, it's very interesting you say that. I don't think I ever saw a bad picture of Princess Diana. Now, of course, the press were putting wonderful pictures on their papers every day, but I never saw a bad one.
Well, certainly there weren't any in the exhibition that I was looking at, but you're right. If you look back through her life, the photos that are shown, she's always, sparkling or
Yes,
thoughtful, or I mean,
absolutely.
She wasn't always happy. Sometimes she was being very thoughtful and so forth. But you're right. There was something about the planes of her face and the way she carried herself and all that the camera truly embraced. Some people are photogenic and some people are hopelessly not. So,
yes, I agree with that.
So, William Warwick, you wrote the Clifton Chronicles, and do you like what is your do you like writing like several books exploring a particular group of?
Well, that was a new experiment. The Clifton Chronicles. I was 70 years old, and the Bible says very clearly that you will live to 70 years and 10. So I thought, well, please, can you let me live to 77? Because I want to write these Clifton Chronicles about Harry Clifton, who's a writer, and do his whole history from where he was born in the back streets of Bristol and marries this remarkable woman who goes on to be a cabinet minister under Margaret Thatcher. That was that. But I got to 77. I thought, I want to write about William Warwick, who was the eponymous hero of Harry Clifton. And I looked up and said, please, I want him to go from being a detective on the beat right the way through the force until he becomes commissioner of the Metropolitan Police. The book you have in front of you is book number 5, where he's a chief inspector. The next book I've already finished, and he's a superintendent, and he's now in charge literally of Her Majesty the Queen. And I have got to live, Barbara, to the age of 86 in order to get him to be the commissioner of the Metropolitan Police. Now, I have no doubt that he will become commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, but I've still got to live to 86 in order to write it, because he's at the moment a superintendent, and then he'll become a commander, and then he'll become commissioner.
Oh, you have it well thought out. I'm sure that sheer determination will get you to 86.
I hope you're right.
No, not worrying about that. But is a design where you write, I mean, it almost seems sort of Victorian in a way, where you write a saga or several books about a family like the Clifton Chronicles, or a character following his career. That takes a lot. There's a big through line when you decide to write something like that. You have to, the plot of the book is individual, but you also have to have an arc plot that will go from the beginning.
Yes, you have to. You're quite right. You have to have an overall.
Right.
I don't. It comes sort of during. But I tell you what my publishers do. This would fascinate even someone with all your experience, Barbara. When I present a book to my publishers now, like Next in Line, they show it to someone who has never read any of my books at any time. And they say, could you please point out what you don't understand? And I got this on this book, Next in Line. The lady who read it didn't understand 4 things. She didn't fully understand the relationship between the wicked and evil Christina and Miles Faulkner. So I had to write a bit more description to show the new reader how that was the case. They didn't fully understand the children, what age they were, Artemisia and Peter, what age they were, what stage they were at school. She got that they were the children, and they were totally fooled by, or this lady was, young Jojo, the daughter of Ross Hogan. Why is he living at home with William Warwick and not living at home with her father? And I looked at that and thought, oh, it's in the last book. Ah, but I haven't read the last book. So we have someone reading each book to make sure they can be read as an individual entity without having to refer to any other book.
But you know, that's fascinating because all of her questions were related to family. They were not about the plot. They were not about the Royal Protection Service. They were not about how this all plays out. So apparently your plot was seamless, and you know, it was the relationships
Correct.
and the family.
I hadn't thought of it that way, but you're quite right. There were no questions about the plot. You're quite right. There was, they were quite happy with that. All the questions were about the family.
Right. So you obviously engineered the story extremely well. And I haven't mentioned one of the things I really liked about this book. I actually read it in one afternoon. I know it's annoying. I read so fast,
That's
but I
very
do.
flattering.
But it's a story that the pacing in it is fabulous. And it builds, and really the last, I don't remember how many pages, you just can't tear yourself away. You are so anxious to see how it's going to play. Now, the challenge, which I think is interesting, Jeffrey, is that we know Princess Diana survived. I mean, you know, you're not writing the death of Princess Diana.
That's a fact.
So how do you have somebody, the princess, in terrible jeopardy, and how do you take us through to how it resolves, even though we know she's going to live through it? Why are we so scared? Why are we so worried?
I wish I could answer that question.
Well, I thought it was.
I wish I could sit here and say, I know. I am a storyteller, Barbara. I want you to turn the page. The fact that you finished it in one afternoon is all that an author can pray for. And even though you knew Diana went on to live after the incident, it doesn't seem to have worried you. You went with the incident. And what is interesting is whether you think the incident actually happened or not.
Well, that's certainly true. And I think that the other characters besides Diana are so vivid, and it's their fates, because so many of them are fictional. It's their fates that really are at stake here. And, you know, to hang a book on a real person, is that harder than if you have, you know, created an entirely fictional cast?
Well, you're very aware in the case when I wrote in the Clifton Chronicles about Margaret Thatcher, and in this particular book where I have written about a Princess Diana, you're very aware that everybody reading the book knows who they are.
Yeah.
I had, as you know, the honor of working 11 years with Margaret Thatcher, so I think I can say I knew her pretty well. And I worked with Diana over many years, and she came to my home and I came to her home, and we wrote letters to each other and we phoned each other, and my wife became a friend of hers. So I think I can say I knew her. And what has been very nice, Barbara, is that I've had letters from 2 members of the royal family. Like you, actually one of them read it in 2 days, and the other one has sent a long list of why she found Diana so believable. So because I was an inch worried that the royal family might not like it, or they might feel I was being disrespectful, but clearly not. They've loved the book like you, so I'm very touched.
Oh, well, I am so glad. Now, I am completely intrigued by your very last comment in these pages, which is that you are looking at a story that was presented to you by your friend, and I can't quite remember his name, but anyway, the lovely Norwegian man who is the head of Viking Cruise Line is what I'm
Yes, Tors Hagen.
Right. Now, I have sailed on Viking 2 or 3 times, and in fact, I am signed up to do a cruise around the Great Lakes here in the United States next September, because Viking was able to overcome the Jones Act, which was for years kept anyone but American-owned and crewed vessels from plying American waters. So if you wanted, for example, to take a trip on the Columbia River, which I've done, or I just got back from the Mississippi, you needed to go on an American-owned ship with an American crew. But Viking has somehow or other overcome that, and they are now doing cruises down the Mississippi and across the Great Lakes, because they expanded from river boats to ocean travel. Anyway,
he's an amazing man, Tors Hagen. He's an amazing entrepreneur. And of course, because of COVID, he nearly went under, because he had 41 ships sitting in dock, and he had 20,000 people who he was paying, and he nearly went under. But I'm happy to say that he's now back fighting fit. He's a very great man.
It's very interesting. He's one of the sponsors of Masterpiece Theater, and they do a whole commercial. Well, yeah, it is a commercial, let's be blunt, with Masterpiece Theater, and he speaks, from around like the campfire or wherever he happens to be. Very distinguished looking man, very well spoken.
Yes,
but obviously a very successful businessman. But I gather I'm going to have to wait till you write the book to find out what the great story is that he told you.
You will. The next book, it was really strange. It was at a dinner party, quite late in the evening, when he said, a man sitting next to him who was a personal friend of the royal family, said, "I have a story for you, Geoffrey." And I thought, oh God, here we go again. And he told me in 2 minutes, possibly 3, one of the most amazing stories I've ever heard in my life. And it will be the book after this. And I haven't, because it's so top secret, because of the position he held, I will not be telling anybody until you get the copy. But like you got this one early, Barbara, so you'll get the next one early. I think I can tell you the title without being, no, perhaps I can't even tell you that without being told off. Maybe when we come off screen, I'll tell you. But yes, I'm very excited about it, because it's very rare you're given something quite that magic.
Yeah, but I come back to our point we discussed earlier, which is because of your experience and connections that people bring you stories. That
yes, they do. And you're quite right. They actually bring them to you. You're quite right. I got a story for you, Geoffrey. You're quite right.
And well, for you, the trick is to weed out the chaff and just keep the kernel. But nonetheless, what a fortunate thing. Let's call Patrick up and see if we have any comments or questions that the audience might have provided. I think this is what, your 7th or 8th Zoom event today. So you must be exhausted. Not you, Patrick, Geoffrey.
I think at 82, I'm doing well. Thank you, Barbara.
I know, and so late at night. So
we've done Poison Pen before, and we'll do it again.
Excellent. It's really a treat to talk to you. I'm so much enjoy it. Patrick, is there anything you'd like to contribute to this?
Sure. There were actually a few people that were guessing at the name of that designer that you were mentioning earlier.
Oh.
And several people thought it might be Betsy Johnson.
No.
Zandra Rhodes.
That's it. It was Zandra Rhodes. Yep, absolutely.
Oh, Rhodes. Oh well,
yep.
She was a giant.
Yep.
Giant.
Right.
She was a lovely dinner partner, and she was wearing her own couture. And it was really fun.
She was a very beautiful woman too.
Yep, it was really fun to talk to her. But that is who it is. Thank you, Patrick.
So that was Gretchen who gets the credit for that one.
Hey, Gretchen, thank you very much.
Way to go. I have a question about the editing process. And the gist of the question is, what kind of changes do you make, or what are you looking for when you're rewriting a book, when you're going through different drafts of a novel?
Well, I don't let the editor see it until about the 10th draft. By then, I've done, and there are different types of editor. There's a line editor who checks full stops, inverted commas, what's missing. But I had the very, very great honor and very, very great privilege of being, when I wrote Cain and Abel, I was edited by the great Corliss Smith, who of course edited J.D. Salinger, one of the great giants of American literature and one of the great editors. And I was a young man when I wrote Cain and Abel, and it was like being with an Oxford professor. It was like having a tutorial. And he edited 5 of my books, and I learned so much from him. He had such a fine brain and such knowledge. And I sat there like a child, learning and learning. And so I said to him, just before he died, I said, Corliss, what's the difference between a great writer and a great editor? And he said, Jeffrey, the first draft. So he knew he could never write a book himself, but he knew he could bring to a book staggering knowledge of what would make it better. And if I may be allowed to just very quickly give you an example. When I wrote Cain and Abel, Cain had 120 pages. Abel had 120 pages. They met, and their whole life changed because of that one meeting. And he sat down with me and said, I want to rewrite Jeffrey. I want 4 pages of Cain, 4 pages of Abel, 8 pages of Cain, 8 pages of Abel, 16 pages of Cain, 16 pages of Abel, 20 pages of Cain, 20 pages of Abel, and then they'll meet. It was all there. I had to cut the places and join them up. It was all there, but he had spotted. And I said, why do you want that, Corliss? And he said, because when I got to the end of Cain, I didn't want to meet Abel. When I got to the end of Abel, I didn't want to come back to Cain. So I said, you have to keep bringing them back in order to make me stay. And what a simple piece of editing. And when the book came out and went to #1 on the New York Times and sold 1 million copies in the first week and stayed on the bestsellers list for 57 weeks, of course, I realized what he had done, what he had achieved. In fact, my publisher said, oh, Jeffrey, you'd be amazed how many books we're getting at the moment. 4 pages of one, 4 pages of another, 8 pages of one. So it was a privilege to be edited by one of the truly great American editors.
So what you're basically saying is that you provide the character, the content, whatever it is, but structuring the story is maybe where the editor is the most helpful?
Yes. Not only that, Barbara, yes, they come to it with fresh eyes.
Mm-hmm.
They haven't been through the 14 drafts with you. They haven't been through the agony. You got to the end and you think, and then a totally fresh brain comes onto it. And they say, in the latest book, my latest editor in HarperCollins, Kate Elton, her genius is that she always wants more of something. So when the book is finished, she came back and said, look, I've fallen in love with Princess Diana. I want more Diana. And she showed me the 2 places where she wanted it. Couldn't write a word, but she showed me, said, I want more Diana there. So the handbag scene was written when you'll remember the handbag scene was written there. And the stealing of the pepper pots was written there. I'd always had those stories and I put them in. Yes, that's exactly what I want. So different editors bring different things to a book, but it's a fool who, having finished a book, a fool who thinks, oh, I'm so clever, I'm so good, I don't need an editor. It's very wise to have someone look carefully at it, and just point out. They need to be experienced. Point out where you could make it better.
Let's see. Okay, there's another question. Actually, I'm interested in this too. You mentioned a while ago about writing villains and how much more fun they can sometimes be than the heroes. And I remember taking a class on Milton, and when we were reading Paradise Lost, we got into a big discussion about that, about how the rebel angel was more interesting and had the better lines. And can you talk about writing villains or expand on that a little bit?
Well, Milton's an interesting choice because Paradise Lost, of course, is a work of genius, as is Paradise Regained. They're both works of genius. But if you look at England's greatest writer, historically England's greatest writer, William Shakespeare, time and again, it's the villains, isn't it? I mean, Richard III is, you follow every single thing he does.
Iago.
And Cassius in, sorry, who did you pick?
Iago.
Yes, well, Iago, the longest part he ever wrote of any, and it's the toughest part. I saw it played by Frank Finlay. He was playing opposite Laurence Olivier at the National Theatre. And Laurence Olivier said that Frank Finlay's portrayal of Iago was the greatest Iago he'd ever seen. It's the longest single part in any Shakespeare play. Isn't it a wonderful part, though? I mean, you're so evil, and you're confiding with the audience the whole time, your venality. And I love that part. And I knew Frank. I had the privilege of knowing Frank. So I thought it was wonderful when Olivier said that he was the greatest Iago. But you're quite right. He is the center of that, and he is a villain.
Well, I frequently say to people, the importance of a villain is illustrated by Silence of the Lambs. Almost everyone knows Hannibal Lecter.
Yes,
not everybody remembers, the name of the FBI agent. And, it's a real triumph to come up with a character.
And if I may say, Barbara, beautifully portrayed by Anthony Hopkins.
Absolutely.
What a fine actor he is. I've seen him play so many great parts over the years. He is our great living actor.
But you touch on something I find really interesting, and Patrick and I have talked about this. When there is a great theatrical or a great film presentation, created from a book, I think that oftentimes readers fuse them in their minds. And, I once asked at a very large gathering, how many people had actually read The Maltese Falcon as opposed to watching the movie with Humphrey Bogart?
I haven't.
Well, and most people had not read the book, but they felt that they knew the book and the story. And so, I think with Silence of the Lambs, I think that you can't ever separate the movie and Anthony Hopkins' portrait.
No, you could never do it. You're quite right.
From the book.
Right.
And now it's even more confusing with audiobooks and so forth. I often wonder, still, there has to be the basic story there. You still have to have told the basic story. However, it then is
presented. You're very kind. And you're quite right. In the end, I mean, actually, Tony Hopkins was kind enough to say to me, I can't do it without the words, Jeffrey, and you write the words. So he was very aware of that. But what a beautiful actor. What a beautiful actor.
Remarkable. I agree. Anything else, Patrick?
Yes, a question from Vicky. She says, Jeffrey, my question to you, sorry, it keeps moving, is that I know your main character, William, is moving along in his career as we go through each book in the series. But, where is it? But how do you determine what William is going to be investigating in each book? Does the storyline just come about for you and you take,
good question.
Yeah.
Good question.
Yep.
Well, I decided to start with art fraud when he was a constable, because art is something I'm passionate about. I then moved on to drugs, which I didn't know a lot about, but my two researchers brought in the head of the drug squad. And that was learning about heroin, crack cocaine, even the soft drugs, and how many people are involved in Britain. Frightening, 250,000 people on heroin in Britain. And getting the figures was one thing, and then getting the personal stories. The third book, Police Corruption, I had the man who was in charge of that department and told me the things they got up to, and I, so naive, I couldn't believe them. Then we went on in the fourth book to murder, and I had the head of the murder squad tell me what he went through on a daily basis. And in this one, Royalty Protection, I had the person who found out what was really going on, a lady chief inspector, and I had Princess Diana's Ken Wharf, the personal protection officer, royalty protection. So, and you learn stories from them. You ask them questions, you push them, you pull them, and you get out of them as much as you possibly can. And then, of course, you have to weave it all together and make it work. And then you have to show them the book. So in the case of this book, I had 3 members of the royal family read it, and 3 senior police officers read it. And they came back with tiny things they said were wrong, or tiny things they thought could be altered. But I make sure at the end of each book, the answer to the question is, I make sure at the end of each book, an expert in that subject reads it and tells me when I've got something wrong.
This is very interesting because one of the questions alludes back to what you said before about write what you know.
Yes.
And it sounds almost like you're saying, and if you don't know it, find out about it, research about it.
Yes, but don't do something for the sake of it. Don't use bad language. Don't have sex scenes. Don't have violence because you think that will sell books. Do what you feel comfortable with. Write the sort of book you want to read. And if the public are kind, as they have been in my case, and bought millions of them, I'm not going to change. And if I'm proud of anything, sir, I'm proud of the fact that I wrote Not a Penny More, Not a Penny Less 45 years ago. And I'm still going. I'm still getting #1 places. And I'm not going to change. If some new fashion comes in, I won't be going down that road because I can't do it. I'm a simple storyteller who wishes to entertain and make you turn the page.
Wow. Well, that almost seems like the perfect comment to end this on. Patrick, was there anything else we're leaving out?
No, I think you're right. I think that is a great note.
We can't top that. So Patrick, why don't you take us off the air? And I want to thank not you, Jeffrey, but everybody else. I want to thank everyone for joining us this evening in Britain and this afternoon here in the United States. And again, I'll remind you that Jeffrey very kindly autographed copies of Next in Line, and you can still buy one from us while we have them. So bye, everyone.
And can I say thank you too, because I have a long love and affection of the United States, which has gone on now for 50 years. One of my dearest friends when I was at Oxford, and one of my ushers at my wedding was Bill Bradley.
Wow.
So I have a long interest in politics and a long interest in the United States. And so it's always a pleasure to chat to you personally, and to end by saying